Standing in my designer dress at our anniversary party, watching my husband Nathan slow dance with his ex-girlfriend while our guests pretended not to notice, I knew this was the moment my perfect life officially shattered. What I announced into that microphone 30 minutes later didn't just end the party. It ended everything Nathan thought he knew about the woman he'd been married to for 12 years. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The champagne flute felt cold against my palm as I stood frozen on the marble terrace of Desert Ridge Country Club, watching my marriage dissolve in real time. The Phoenix sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, creating the perfect backdrop for what should have been a celebration of 12 years together. Instead, I was witnessing the most humiliating moment of my 45 years on this earth. Nathan had his arms wrapped around Amber Rodriguez, swaying to the jazz quartet we'd hired for our anniversary party. The same woman who'd broken his heart in college, the one he claimed he'd gotten over decades ago. Her red dress clung to her figure as she whispered something in his ear that made him throw his head back and laugh with more genuine joy than I'd seen from him in months. Our 120 guests were trying their best to look anywhere else, but I could feel their collective discomfort radiating across the carefully decorated venue. The white roses and fairy lights that had taken me weeks to plan suddenly felt like props in someone else's nightmare. My sister-in-law Rita caught my eye from across the dance floor, her expression a mixture of rage and sympathy that somehow made everything worse. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd planned every detail of this evening myself. 3 months of coordinating with caterers, florists, and the country club staff to create the perfect celebration of our marriage. I'd even hired Carlos Martinez, Phoenix's most sought-after event photographer, to capture what I'd foolishly believed would be beautiful memories. Now he was discreetly positioned near the bar, his camera lowered, clearly unsure whether to document this train wreck or pretend it wasn't happening. Nathan had seemed different these past few weeks, more attentive than he'd been in years. He'd brought me coffee in bed, complimented my hair, even helped with the party planning without his usual complaints about social obligations. I'd attributed his improved mood to excitement about our anniversary celebration and maybe some midlife clarity about what really mattered. How naive I'd been. The transformation had started 2 months ago when Amber moved back to Phoenix after her divorce was finalized. She'd reached out to Nathan through LinkedIn, claiming she wanted to reconnect with old friends now that she was starting fresh in their hometown. He'd mentioned it casually over dinner, even showing me her profile picture with what I'd interpreted as nostalgic fondness rather than rekindled attraction. "She looks exactly the same," he'd said, scrolling through her photos. "Remember I told you about Amber from ASU? We dated for 3 years before she moved to California for that marketing job." I'd smiled and nodded, secure in our marriage and genuinely happy that Nathan was reconnecting with his past. That confidence felt laughable now as I watched them, move together with the familiarity of people who'd shared intimate moments long before I'd entered the picture. The worst part was how natural they looked together. Nathan's hand rested on the small of her back with casual possession, while she traced patterns on his shoulder with her perfectly manicured nails. They weren't trying to hide their connection. They were flaunting it in front of everyone who mattered in our social circle. My phone buzzed in my clutch, pulling me from my paralysis. A text from my 16-year-old son Tyler, who was supposed to arrive with his sister Grace after their school activities ended. "Mom, Grace has a headache and doesn't want to come to the party. I'm going to stay home with her. Tell Dad we said, happy anniversary." Relief flooded through me that my children wouldn't witness this spectacle, followed immediately by the crushing realization that Nathan hadn't even noticed they weren't here. He was too absorbed in his reunion with the woman, who'd apparently never really left his heart. I'd met Nathan when I was 33 and thought I'd found my forever person. He was charming, ambitious, and pursuing his dream of building a financial advisory practice in Phoenix's booming market. I'd been establishing myself as a marketing executive at Pinnacle Digital, working with luxury real estate developers and high-end service providers throughout Arizona. We'd met at a networking event, bonded over our shared entrepreneurial spirit, and built what I'd believed was a partnership based on mutual respect and genuine love. When Tyler was born 2 years into our marriage, I'd made the decision to step back from my career to support Nathan's growing practice and focus on raising our family. It had felt like the right choice at the time. Nathan's business was demanding, requiring long hours and constant client cultivation. Someone needed to manage our household, coordinate the children's activities, and maintain the social connections that were crucial to his professional success. I'd thrown myself into being the perfect wife and mother with the same intensity I'd once brought to marketing campaigns. I'd organized charity fundraisers, hosted client dinners, and managed every aspect of our family life so Nathan could concentrate on building Southwest Financial Advisory Group into one of Phoenix's most respected firms. Over the years, I'd watched him transform from a hopeful entrepreneur into a successful partner with a corner office and a client roster worth millions. The song ended, but Nathan and Amber remained in their embrace for several beats longer than necessary. When they finally separated, she placed her hand on his chest and said something that made him smile with the kind of warmth he used to reserve for me. Then she kissed his cheek, lingering just long enough to make her intentions crystal clear. That's when Nathan's eyes found mine across the terrace. Instead of guilt or embarrassment, I saw something that chilled me to the bone: defiance. He wasn't ashamed of what he was doing. He wanted me to see it. Amber followed his gaze, and when she spotted me, her smile transformed into something predatory. She'd won, and she wanted me to know it. The woman who'd once walked away from Nathan was back to reclaim what she'd apparently always considered hers. The jazz quartet launched into another slow song, and other couples began joining them on the dance floor. Our friends and Nathan's colleagues swayed with their spouses while mine continued his public courtship of another woman. I recognized the irony that the very social connections I'd cultivated to support his career were now witnessing its potential destruction. My mind began racing with questions I'd been too trusting to ask before tonight. How long had they been in contact? Had their reconnection been limited to professional networking, or had it evolved into something more intimate? The way they moved together suggested a comfort level that couldn't have developed overnight. I thought about the evenings Nathan had worked late recently, the weekend golf games that seemed to stretch longer than usual, the business trips to Tucson and Flagstaff that had multiplied over the past month. He'd claimed his practice was expanding, requiring more face-to-face meetings with potential clients throughout Arizona. Now I wondered if those meetings had included stops to see Amber, who worked for a marketing agency that specialized in financial services. Rita appeared at my side, her face flushed with anger. "Diana, what the hell is Nathan thinking? Everyone can see what's happening." I couldn't find words to respond. The woman who'd spent 12 years supporting her husband's dreams, managing his household and raising his children was apparently easy to discard when something more exciting came along. "Do you want me to say something to him?" Rita continued, her voice tight with protective fury. "This is completely inappropriate." I shook my head, finally finding my voice. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Not yet. Let me think. But thinking was becoming increasingly difficult as the reality of my situation crystallized. The man I'd built my entire adult life around was publicly humiliating me at our anniversary party. The business success I'd helped him achieve had given him the confidence to pursue the woman who'd once broken his heart. The social status I'd helped him cultivate was now providing the perfect stage for my emotional destruction. Carlos approached us cautiously, his camera hanging unused around his neck. "Mrs. Castellano, would you like me to continue photographing the party? I can focus on other guests if you prefer." His diplomatic phrasing told me everything I needed to know about how obvious Nathan's betrayal had become. Even the photographer we'd hired was trying to spare me further documentation of this nightmare. "Actually, Carlos, I want you to keep taking pictures," I said, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. "Document everything." He nodded uncertainly and moved away, but not before I caught the sympathy in his expression. How many times had he photographed celebrations that turned into disasters? How many marriages had he watched implode through his viewfinder? The party continued around me with surreal normalcy. Guests sampled the gourmet appetizers I'd selected, sipped the wines Nathan and I had chosen together, and admired the floral arrangements that had cost more than some people's monthly mortgage payments. The jazz quartet played the songs from our original wedding playlist, each melody now twisted into something mocking. Nathan's business partner, David Park, approached the bar near where I stood, ordering another scotch and deliberately avoiding eye contact. He'd known Nathan longer than I had, dating back to their early days building the financial practice together. If anyone understood what was happening tonight, it would be David. "Interesting party," he said quietly, his tone carefully neutral. "Very enlightening," I replied, matching his diplomatic approach. David took a long sip of his drink before responding. "Nathan's been different lately. Distracted during meetings, constantly checking his phone. Some of the other partners have noticed." This was news to me. Nathan had always been meticulous about his professional reputation, understanding that client confidence was everything in the financial services industry. If his colleagues were noticing changes in his behavior, the situation was more serious than I'd realized. "How long have you known Amber was back in town?" I asked. David's hesitation told me he'd been hoping to avoid this conversation. "She contacted our office about 6 weeks ago. Said she was looking for a financial advisor to help her navigate her divorce settlement. Nathan volunteered to handle her account personally." 6 weeks. Nathan had been working with his ex-girlfriend for 6 weeks without mentioning the professional relationship to me. The coffee dates, the long phone calls, the sudden improvements in his mood, it all made perfect sense now. "Has she been to your office?" I pressed. "Several times, always scheduled during lunch hours or after normal business hours." Nathan said she preferred privacy given the sensitive nature of her financial situation. The pieces of their affair were falling into place with devastating clarity. Nathan had used his professional expertise to insert himself into Amber's life during her vulnerable divorce proceedings. He'd positioned himself as her knight in shining armor, helping her navigate the complexities of asset division and financial independence. No wonder she looked at him with such obvious adoration. I excused myself from David and walked toward the ladies' room, needing a moment away from the spectacle on the dance floor. The mirror reflected a woman I barely recognized. My carefully applied makeup couldn't hide the shock in my eyes or the tightness around my mouth that spoke of profound betrayal. The door opened behind me, and Amber entered with the confidence of someone who knew she held all the cards. Up close, she was even more striking than her social media photos had suggested. Her skin had the glow of someone who'd spent years in California's perpetual sunshine, and her figure suggested dedication to personal trainers and nutritionists. "Diana, right?" she said, as if we hadn't been introduced earlier in the evening. "What a lovely party. You really outdid yourself with the decorations." Her casual cruelty was breathtaking. She was complimenting me on planning the celebration, where she was stealing my husband. "Thank you," I managed, my voice surprisingly steady. "I hope you're enjoying yourself." "Oh, I am." Her smile was radiant with victory. "It's wonderful reconnecting with old friends. Nathan and I have so much history together." The implication was clear. Their shared past gave her a claim on him that my 12 years of marriage couldn't match. In her mind, I was the interloper who'd temporarily borrowed what had always rightfully belonged to her. "Nathan's told me so much about your life together," she continued, applying fresh lipstick in the mirror. "It sounds like you've been incredibly supportive of his career. That must be satisfying." The condescension in her tone made it clear what she thought of my choices. I'd been the supportive wife who'd sacrificed her own ambitions to elevate her husband's, while she'd pursued her own career and maintained her independence. In her estimation, I'd made myself dispensable through my devotion. I left the restroom without responding, but her words echoed in my mind as I returned to the party. Had I made myself dispensable? Had my willingness to prioritize Nathan's needs over my own convinced him that I was easily replaceable? The evening was reaching its peak, with guests gathered around the bar and scattered across the terrace, enjoying the perfect Arizona weather. Nathan had finally separated from Amber, but only to make rounds among his business contacts, playing the role of gracious host while she held court near the fountain with several other women. I watched him work the crowd with practiced charm, discussing market conditions and investment strategies with the same clients I'd entertained in our home countless times. These were relationships I'd helped him build through dinner parties, golf tournaments, and charity events. The irony that he was maintaining his professional facade while destroying our personal life wasn't lost on me. My phone buzzed again, this time with a text from my daughter Grace. "Mom, Tyler's being weird about the party. He keeps checking social media and getting upset. Did something happen?" Even my teenagers could sense that something was wrong. The humiliation was spreading. Beyond the immediate guests to anyone with access to social media, people were undoubtedly posting photos and videos that would immortalize this disaster long after the last champagne glass was cleared away. I realized that my entire support system was watching my marriage crumble in real time. The friends I'd made through Nathan's business connections, the neighbors who'd shared countless family gatherings, the parents from my children's schools who'd collaborated on fundraisers and volunteer projects, they were all witnesses to my public humiliation. But as I stood there, watching Nathan charm his audience while his ex-girlfriend mingled with my friends, something began shifting inside me. The initial shock was hardening into something more focused and dangerous. The marketing executive who'd once orchestrated successful campaigns for Phoenix's most demanding clients was still there, buried under years of domestic prioritization, but not extinct. I'd spent 12 years building Nathan's career, managing his reputation, and cultivating the relationships that had made his success possible. Every client dinner I'd hosted, every charity event I'd organized, every social connection I'd maintained had contributed to his professional standing. The network that surrounded us tonight wasn't just his, it was ours, built through my efforts as much as his. And if I'd helped create his success, I certainly had the knowledge and connections to influence its continuation. The jazz quartet announced they'd be taking a short break, and several guests began migrating toward the appetizer stations. This was typically when the host would make a toast, thanking everyone for celebrating with them and reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this milestone. Nathan caught my eye across the terrace and nodded toward the small stage where the musicians had been performing. He expected me to join him for our traditional anniversary speech, probably assuming I'd play the part of the gracious wife while he publicly thanked everyone for sharing our special evening. The microphone waited on its stand, ready to amplify whatever words would define this night. Nathan moved toward it with confident steps, clearly prepared to deliver the kind of charming remarks that had made him successful in business. He expected me to stand beside him, smiling supportively while he controlled the narrative of our celebration. But as I walked toward that microphone, my mind was already crafting a very different kind of announcement. One that would transform this anniversary party from a celebration into something else entirely. One that would remind everyone present exactly who Diana Castellano had been before she'd devoted herself to being Nathan's wife. And one that would make my husband realize that the woman he'd taken for granted possessed knowledge and connections that could reshape his entire world with a few carefully chosen words. The crowd began gathering around the stage area, anticipating the traditional toast that would cap off the evening's festivities. Nathan reached for my hand as I approached, his fingers warm and familiar despite everything that had transpired. But instead of taking his hand, I stepped forward alone and lifted the microphone from its stand. The chattering crowd gradually quieted, turning their attention toward me with expectant smiles. They had no idea that the speech I was about to deliver would become the most memorable moment of Nathan Castellanos' professional and personal life. The weight of the microphone felt substantial in my hand as I looked out at the faces of everyone who mattered in our Phoenix social circle. Nathan stood beside me, his confidence wavering slightly as he noticed I hadn't taken his offered hand. The evening breeze carried the scent of desert jasmine across the terrace, a fragrance that would forever remind me of this pivotal moment. "Thank you all for being here tonight," I began, my voice carrying clearly across the gathered crowd. 12 years ago, Nathan and I promised to love, honor, and cherish each other through whatever life brought our way. The audience smiled warmly, settling in for what they expected to be a heartfelt reflection on marriage and commitment. Nathan, visibly relaxed beside me, probably relieved that I was maintaining the facade of our perfect partnership. "Tonight has certainly brought us something unexpected," I continued, my tone still warm but with an edge that made a few people in the front row shift uncomfortably. "And I want to share with all of you exactly what I've discovered about the man I married." Nathan's smile faltered. He reached for the microphone, but I smoothly stepped away, keeping it firmly in my grasp. "You see, I've spent the last 12 years believing that marriage was about building something together, supporting each other's dreams, and creating a foundation of trust that could weather any storm." My voice grew stronger with each word. "I thought partnership meant sacrificing your own ambitions to elevate your spouse, trusting that they valued your contributions enough to honor the commitment you'd made together." The crowd was beginning to sense that this wasn't going to be a typical anniversary toast. I could see Rita nodding approvingly from her position near the bar, while David Park had gone pale beside her. What I learned tonight is that some people view marriage as a convenience rather than a commitment, a placeholder until something more appealing comes along. I paused, letting my gaze sweep across the faces before me, many of whom were now looking distinctly uncomfortable. Nathan stepped closer to me, his voice low but audible to those nearby. "Diana, maybe we should take this inside." "Oh no, darling," I replied, my endearment laced with steel. "Our guests came here to celebrate our marriage. They deserve to understand exactly what they're celebrating." I turned back to the microphone, my marketing instincts taking over. I'd learned long ago that the key to effective communication was knowing your audience, and I knew this crowd intimately. These were Nathan's clients, colleagues, and professional contacts. Their opinion of him directly impacted his ability to maintain and grow his business. Many of you know that I stepped away from my career at Pinnacle Digital Marketing to support Nathan's dream of building Southwest Financial Advisory Group. What you might not know is that I didn't just manage our household during those years. I maintained the relationships that became the foundation of his client base. Several heads nodded in recognition. These people remembered the dinner parties I'd hosted, the charity events I'd organized, the countless social gatherings where business relationships had been cultivated and strengthened. I coordinated the networking events where Nathan met many of you. I organized the golf tournaments that cemented his reputation in Phoenix's business community. I managed the social calendar that allowed him to maintain the personal connections that turned prospects into loyal clients. Nathan's face had gone ashen. He was beginning to understand that this wasn't just a public airing of our marital problems. It was a systematic dismantling of the professional image we'd built together. But perhaps most importantly, I continued, my voice gaining momentum, I maintained the financial records, client correspondence, and business documentation that allowed Southwest Financial Advisory Group to operate smoothly and efficiently. A murmur rippled through the crowd. They were starting to grasp the implications of what I was revealing. You see, when you're married to a financial advisor, you learn quite a bit about business operations, client management, and professional ethics. You become intimately familiar with compliance requirements, fiduciary responsibilities, and the standards of conduct that govern the industry. David Park was now staring at me with undisguised alarm. As Nathan's business partner, he understood exactly where this was heading. Which brings me to tonight's revelation about my husband's character and judgment. I smiled at Nathan, whose confident demeanor had completely evaporated. Some of you may have noticed Nathan's enthusiastic reunion with his college girlfriend, Amber Rodriguez. The crowd exchanged glances, no longer able to pretend they hadn't witnessed the earlier display on the dance floor. What you probably don't know is that Amber became Nathan's client 6 weeks ago, seeking financial advice to navigate her recent divorce settlement. A vulnerable woman in a significant life transition, trusting Nathan's expertise to protect her financial future. The implications hung heavy in the desert air. Everyone present understood the ethical boundaries that governed professional relationships in the financial services industry. Now, I'm sure Nathan would argue that their relationship began innocently enough. Old friends reconnecting, professional advice offered with genuine concern for her welfare. But when a financial advisor begins a romantic relationship with a client, particularly one in a vulnerable emotional and financial state, it raises serious questions about professional judgment and ethical conduct. Nathan stepped forward again, his voice tight with controlled panic. "Diana, you don't understand the situation." "Oh, but I do understand," I replied, never breaking eye contact with our guests. "I understand that Arizona's financial services regulations are very specific about conflicts of interest. I understand that Southwest Financial Advisory Group's own compliance policies explicitly prohibit romantic relationships between advisors and their clients." The crowd was now completely silent, hanging on every word. These weren't just social acquaintances anymore. They were witnesses to what could become a career-defining moment. I also understand that the Arizona Corporation Commission takes ethics violations very seriously, particularly when they involve advisors who hold themselves out as trustworthy stewards of their clients' financial welfare. David Park had moved closer to the stage, clearly wanting to intervene but uncertain how to do so without making the situation worse. "But most importantly," I said, my voice dropping to ensure everyone had to listen carefully, "I understand that Nathan has been using company resources to pursue this relationship. Business dinners charged to client entertainment, hotel rooms booked under Southwest Financial's corporate account, even flights to California that were justified as client development opportunities." Nathan's face had gone from pale to gray. He knew I had access to all the financial records, but he'd apparently forgotten that I also understood how to interpret them. The beautiful part about being married to someone for 12 years is that you develop a complete understanding of their patterns, their habits, and their methods of operation. You know when their behavior changes, when their explanations don't align with documented facts, and when their professional conduct falls short of industry standards. I paused to take a sip of water, maintaining perfect composure while Nathan visibly struggled to process the implications of everything I'd revealed. "So here's what I want to announce to all of you tonight, on this 12th anniversary of our marriage," I continued, my voice now carrying the authority I'd once wielded in corporate boardrooms. "Effective immediately, I'm resuming my career in marketing and communications. I'll be launching my own consultancy focused on reputation management and crisis communications for Phoenix's professional services community." The crowd perked up with interest. This was unexpected, but not necessarily scandalous. "My first case study will be examining how professional misconduct can destroy years of careful reputation building, how ethical lapses can unravel client relationships that took decades to establish, how personal choices can have devastating professional consequences." Nathan reached for the microphone again, desperation now evident in his movements. "Diana, please." "I'm not finished, darling." I said, smoothly avoiding his grasp. You see, I'll be documenting exactly how quickly a professional reputation can crumble when clients lose confidence in their advisor's judgment and integrity. The implications were becoming crystal clear to everyone present. I wasn't just threatening to expose Nathan's affair. I was threatening to systematically dismantle the professional relationships that form the foundation of his business. Many of you have trusted Nathan with your financial planning, your investment strategies, your retirement security. You've believed in his professionalism, his discretion, his ability to make sound decisions under pressure. I let my gaze move, from face to face, watching as understanding dawned. Tonight, you've witnessed his decision-making process in action, his ability to maintain professional boundaries, his capacity for discretion and sound judgment. Rita was now openly smiling, clearly enjoying watching her brother-in-law's public comeuppance. Several other guests were checking their phones, probably already planning how to handle their own financial accounts. As I launch my new business, I'll be sharing insights about how to identify red flags in professional relationships, how to recognize when an advisor's personal choices might compromise their professional judgment, how to protect yourself when someone you've trusted begins exhibiting concerning behavior. Nathan finally found his voice, though it came out strained and desperate. You're destroying everything we've built together. No, Nathan, I replied, my tone almost gentle. You did that when you decided our marriage was disposable. I'm simply ensuring that the destruction is complete and public, rather than allowing you to control the narrative. I turned back to our guests, many of whom were now actively taking notes on their phones. I want to thank all of you for being here tonight to witness this important milestone in my life. Not just the end of my marriage, but the beginning of my professional renaissance. My smile was radiant with genuine excitement. I'm rediscovering skills I'd forgotten I possessed, and remembering why I was so successful before I chose to prioritize someone else's dreams over my own. The crowd was now buzzing with energy, but it wasn't the warm celebration Nathan had expected. It was the electric anticipation of people who sensed they were witnessing something significant and potentially profitable. For those of you who might be interested in my reputation management services, I'll be setting up meetings next week to discuss how we can protect your professional standing from association with ethical scandals. I paused for effect. I anticipate there will be considerable demand for that particular expertise in the coming months. Nathan stepped backward, finally grasping the full scope of what I'd unleashed. This wasn't just personal humiliation, it was professional annihilation delivered with surgical precision. Diana, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. We need to talk privately. Oh, I think we're well past private conversations, I replied cheerfully. You made this public. When you chose to conduct your affair at our anniversary party, I'm simply following your lead in terms of transparency. I handed the microphone to Carlos, who'd been capturing every moment of the speech with obvious fascination. Carlos, make sure you get some good shots of the crowd reactions. I have a feeling these photos are going to be quite valuable for my marketing materials. As I stepped down from the stage, I could hear the buzz of conversation erupting around the terrace. People were clustering in small groups, their voices animated with the kind of energy that comes from witnessing unexpected drama. Nathan grabbed my arm as I passed him. You can't do this. You'll destroy both of us. I looked down at his hand on my arm, then back up at his face with an expression of mild surprise. Destroy us? Darling, there is no us anymore. You made that clear when you chose to publicly humiliate me with your ex-girlfriend. Diana, please. Think about Tyler and Grace. Think about our family. I am thinking about them, I replied, calmly. I'm thinking about the example I want to set for our children about self-respect, dignity, and consequences for betrayal. I gently but firmly removed his hand from my arm. I'm also thinking about their financial security, which is Why, I've already contacted our family attorney about protecting their interests during the divorce proceedings. Nathan's eyes widened. Divorce proceedings? Did you think this was just a dramatic gesture? I asked, genuinely curious about his reasoning. Did you imagine I would publicly expose your affair and then pretend everything was fine? Around us, guests were beginning to leave, but not before approaching me with business cards and requests for meetings. Word was spreading quickly through Phoenix's interconnected professional community, and people wanted to position themselves advantageously for whatever came next. Mrs. Castellano, said Margaret Chen, the wife of one of Nathan's biggest clients, I'd love to discuss your reputation management services. I think there might be some opportunities for collaboration. Absolutely, Margaret. Let me give you my card. I produced a business card from my clutch, one I'd had printed 3 days ago when I'd first suspected Nathan's affair might become public knowledge. Nathan stared at the card in shock. You've been planning this. I've been preparing for various possibilities, I corrected him. Unlike some people, I believe in thinking through the consequences of my actions before I take them. More guests approached with similar requests. It seemed that Phoenix's professional community was very interested in learning from someone who could orchestrate such a comprehensive public relations strategy on short notice. Diana, Nathan said, his voice now taking on a pleading tone I'd never heard before. Whatever you think happened with Amber, we can work through it. Don't throw away 12 years over a misunderstanding. I paused in my conversation with Margaret to address him. A misunderstanding? Nathan, I watched you slow dance with your client/girlfriend at our anniversary party, in front of everyone we know. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a choice. It wasn't supposed to happen like this, he said desperately. It just got complicated. Complicated, I repeated thoughtfully. Is that what you call violating professional ethics and marital vows? Complicated? By now, most of the remaining guests were openly listening to our conversation. The pretense of privacy had been abandoned when Nathan chose to make his affair public. Look, he said, glancing around at the watching faces. Maybe we should discuss this at home. Oh, I don't think so, I replied pleasantly. You see, I've changed the locks. Your belongings are packed and waiting in the garage. I thought you might want to stay with Amber since you seem to find her company so compelling. The crowd murmured with appreciation for the dramatic efficiency of my planning. You can't just kick me out of my own house, Nathan protested. Actually, I can, I said, pulling out my phone to show him a document. The house is in my name, purchased with funds from my trust and my premarital assets. You might remember that detail from our prenuptial agreement. Nathan's face went completely white. He'd apparently forgotten about the legal protections I'd insisted on before our marriage, protections that now seemed remarkably prescient. The prenup also has some interesting clauses about infidelity and its impact on asset division, I continued conversationally. My attorney assures me that your relationship with Amber constitutes a clear violation of our marital agreement. Diana, please, he said, his voice breaking slightly. Don't do this. We can fix this. I'll end things with Amber. We can go to counseling. Whatever you want. For the first time that evening, I felt a flicker of the old affection I'd once had for him. He looked genuinely devastated, finally understanding the full scope of what he'd lost. Nathan, I said gently, you made your choice when you decided I was dispensable. When you used our anniversary party as the stage for your reunion with the woman you really wanted. When you humiliated me in front of everyone who matters in our social circle. I never meant for it to go this far, he whispered. But it did go this far, I replied. And now we all have to live with the consequences of your choices. Amber appeared at his side, having finally worked up the courage to approach us directly. She looked significantly less confident than she had earlier in the evening. Nathan, she said uncertainly, maybe we should leave. I smiled at her with genuine warmth. Amber, how lovely to see you again. I hope you've enjoyed the party. She looked confused by my pleasant tone. Diana, I want you to know that Nathan and I didn't plan for this to happen. Oh, I'm sure you didn't plan for it to happen quite this publicly, I agreed. But these things have a way of taking on their own momentum, don't they? I never meant to hurt you, she said, with what appeared to be genuine remorse. I appreciate that, Amber. And I hope you understand that what I've done tonight isn't personal toward you. It's simply a matter of protecting my own interests and those of my children. Nathan looked between us, clearly struggling to understand why we were having such a civilized conversation. You see, Amber, I continued, Nathan's professional reputation is about to become quite problematic. His client relationships are likely to suffer significantly once word spreads about tonight's events. His business partnerships may be reevaluated. His standing in Phoenix's financial community will be severely compromised. Amber's face grew pale as she began to grasp the implications. I just want to make sure you understand what you're taking on, I said kindly. Nathan is going to need a great deal of support in the coming months as he navigates the professional consequences of his choices. I hope you're prepared for that level of commitment. Nathan grabbed Amber's hand. We'll figure it out. We can handle whatever comes. I'm sure you will, I replied, and I wish you both the best of luck with that. I turned to address the remaining guests. Thank you all again for being here tonight. This has certainly been an anniversary to remember. As I walked toward the country club's entrance, my phone began buzzing with text messages and missed calls. Word was spreading quickly through Phoenix's social media networks, and people wanted to understand exactly what they'd witnessed. I smiled as I scrolled through the messages. By tomorrow morning, everyone in our extended social and professional circle would know exactly what had happened at the Castellano anniversary party. The story would spread through country clubs, business meetings, and social gatherings with viral efficiency. Nathan's carefully constructed reputation would be dissected and analyzed in every context that mattered to his career. His clients would question his judgment. His colleagues would distance themselves from potential scandal. His professional relationships would be reevaluated through the lens of his personal choices. And I would be positioned as the dignified, intelligent woman who'd handled an impossible situation with grace and strategic precision. My phone rang, and I recognized the number of Janet Walsh, one of Phoenix's most prominent divorce attorneys. Diana, she said without preamble, I just heard about tonight. Can you meet me first thing Monday morning? Absolutely, I replied. I think you'll find this case quite interesting. As I reached my car, I looked back at the country club terrace where Nathan and Amber stood surrounded by the remnants of our anniversary party. The fairy lights and white roses still created a beautiful backdrop, but the celebration they'd been meant to enhance was thoroughly and permanently destroyed. Tomorrow, I would begin the process of rebuilding my life as a single woman. I would re-establish my career, focus on my children's needs, and create a new identity that wasn't defined by someone else's success or failure. But tonight, I had accomplished something more satisfying than I'd ever imagined possible. I had transformed my most humiliating moment into a strategic victory that would redefine not just my own future, but Nathan's as well. The woman who'd been taken for granted for 12 years was gone forever. In her place stood someone who understood exactly how to leverage knowledge, relationships, and strategic thinking to protect her own interests. And as I drove home through the quiet Phoenix streets, I realized that Nathan had been right about one thing. This anniversary had indeed given me a gift that would change everything. Just not in the way he'd intended. The following morning arrived with Phoenix's characteristic brilliant sunshine, but the light streaming through my bedroom windows felt different somehow. For the first time in 12 years, I woke up alone by choice, rather than abandonment. The silence that had once felt devastating now seemed peaceful, filled with possibility rather than emptiness. My phone had been buzzing incessantly since 6 a.m. with calls, texts, and social media notifications. The story of last night's anniversary party had spread through Phoenix's interconnected social networks faster than I'd anticipated. By the time I'd made my morning coffee, 3 different gossip blogs had posted about the evening's dramatic conclusion, complete with photos Carlos had apparently sold to the highest bidder. I scrolled through the images with detached fascination. The photographer had captured everything with remarkable precision. Nathan's confident approach to the microphone, his growing alarm as my speech progressed, and the crowd's evolution, from polite attention to rapt fascination. The final shots showed him standing alone with Amber while guests approached me with business cards and eager expressions. Grace knocked on my bedroom door, entering with the cautious expression she'd worn since Nathan's belongings had been moved to the garage the previous week. My daughter had inherited my intuition and Nathan's analytical mind, a combination that made her remarkably perceptive about adult situations despite her 13 years. "Mom, Tyler's freaking out about something he saw online," she said, settling onto the edge of my bed with her laptop. "He won't tell me what it is, but he's been pacing around his room since he woke up." I sighed, having hoped the children could remain somewhat insulated from the public aspects of their parents' marital collapse. "Show me what he found." Grace turned her laptop screen toward me, revealing a Facebook post from one of Tyler's friends' mothers. The woman had attended the anniversary party and posted a lengthy recap of the evening's events, complete with speculation about the future of Nathan's business, and admiration for my brilliant strategic response to betrayal. "She called you a feminist icon," Grace said quietly, "and said Dad got what he deserved for cheating on you publicly." The raw hurt in her voice reminded me that regardless of Nathan's failures as a husband, he was still her father. My children would have to navigate the complex emotions of loving someone who'd behaved badly, and I needed to help them process those feelings without compromising their relationship with him. "Your father made choices that hurt our family," I said carefully. "But that doesn't change the fact that he loves you and Tyler. My anger with him is separate from his relationship with both of you." Grace studied my face with the intensity she usually reserved for difficult math problems. "Are you really going to divorce him?" "Yes, sweetheart. Some things can't be fixed, no matter how much we might want them to be." She nodded slowly, processing information with the same methodical approach Nathan used for financial analysis. "Will we have to move? Change schools?" "No changes for you and Tyler unless you want them," I assured her. "This house is ours, and I'm going to make sure your lives remain as stable as possible." Tyler appeared in the doorway, his 16-year-old frame filling the space with the kind of restless energy that had been increasing over the past week. My son had Nathan's height and my stubborn streak, a combination that made him formidable when he decided to take a stand on something. "Mom, people are posting videos from last night," he said without preamble. "Someone live-streamed your speech, and it's going viral on TikTok." I hadn't considered the possibility that guests would broadcast the evening's events in real time. The implications of viral social media coverage were significantly more complex than traditional gossip networks. "How viral are we talking?" I asked, reaching for my own phone to check platforms I rarely used. "Over 2 million views since midnight," Tyler said, showing me his screen. "The hashtag is McDropAnniversary, and people are making reaction videos and analysis threads." The video quality was surprisingly clear, showing me at the microphone with perfect audio capture of every word I'd spoken. The comments ranged from supportive to analytical to occasionally vicious, but the overwhelming sentiment seemed to be admiration for what people were calling a masterclass in public revenge. Grace leaned over to read the comments aloud. "This woman is a legend. She destroyed him professionally while maintaining perfect composure. I want to hire her for my divorce. She turned a humiliation into a power move." "Some of them aren't as nice," Tyler warned. "People are saying you were too harsh, that you should have handled it privately." I scrolled through the mixed reactions with growing fascination. The viral nature of the video meant that strangers across the country were debating the ethics and effectiveness of my response to Nathan's betrayal. Women were sharing their own stories of infidelity and inadequate responses. Men were arguing about whether Nathan's behavior justified such comprehensive retaliation. The important thing, I told my children, is that we handle this situation with integrity and focus on what's best for our family. Other people's opinions about my choices don't change the fact that those choices were necessary. My phone rang, interrupting our conversation. Janet Walsh's name appeared on the screen, and I answered immediately. "Diana, we need to meet today instead of Monday," she said without preamble. "The viral video has complicated things in ways we need to discuss immediately." An hour later, I sat in Janet's downtown Phoenix office, watching her review the online coverage of the anniversary party with professional fascination. In 30 years of divorce law, I've never seen a case begin with this level of public documentation and social media scrutiny, she said, scrolling through various platforms. "It's both helpful and problematic." She turned her computer screen toward me, showing a legal analysis blog post titled, "The Castellano Case: When Public Humiliation Becomes Legal Strategy." "Legal scholars are already writing about your approach," Janet continued. "Some are calling it brilliant strategic thinking. Others are concerned about the precedent of using public shame as a divorce tactic." I read through the analysis with growing interest. The author had identified several key legal advantages to my public approach: extensive documentation of Nathan's misconduct, multiple witnesses to his behavior, and preservation of evidence through social media posts and professional photography. "The beauty of your strategy," Janet explained, "is that Nathan can't deny or minimize his actions. Everything is documented and publicly available. He can't claim the affair was a misunderstanding or a momentary lapse in judgment." "What about the professional ethics violations I mentioned?" I asked. "That's where things get interesting," she replied, pulling up another document. "I've already received calls from 3 different regulatory bodies wanting to discuss Nathan's conduct. The Arizona Corporation Commission is particularly interested in the client relationship violations." She handed me a formal complaint form that had been filed that morning. Someone had used the viral video as evidence to report Nathan's relationship with Amber to the state regulatory agency. "The complainant is anonymous, but they've cited specific sections of financial advisor conduct rules that Nathan appears to have violated," Janet said. "This could result in professional sanctions, fines, or even license suspension." The implications were staggering. Nathan's career wasn't just socially damaged, it was potentially over from a regulatory standpoint. "How quickly could these investigations proceed?" I asked. "Faster than usual, given the public nature of the evidence," Janet replied. "Regulatory agencies typically move slowly, but when there's viral video documentation of misconduct, they tend to expedite their reviews." My phone buzzed with an incoming call from David Park. I showed Janet the screen, and she nodded for me to answer. "Diana?" David's voice was strained with barely controlled panic. "We need to talk. Nathan's situation is affecting the entire firm." "What kind of effects are we talking about, David?" 3 major clients have requested transfers to other advisors since this morning. 2 more are demanding meetings to discuss their concerns about Southwest Financial's commitment to professional ethics. Our compliance officer is fielding calls from reporters wanting statements about our internal policies. I put the call on speaker so Janet could hear the full scope of the professional fallout. "The partners are meeting in an emergency session this afternoon," David continued. "Nathan's position with the firm is being reevaluated." "What exactly does that mean?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew. "It means we're considering suspension pending the outcome of regulatory investigations. We can't have him meeting with clients while there are active ethics complaints against him." Janet and I exchanged glances. the professional consequences were unfolding even faster than we'd anticipated. "David, I appreciate you keeping me informed," I said. "I hope the firm can navigate this situation successfully." "Diana," his voice dropped to a more personal tone, "Nathan is asking if you'd be willing to meet with him. He wants to discuss options for damage control." "Nathan had 12 years to discuss options with me," I replied calmly. "He chose to have those discussions with Amber instead." After ending the call, Janet leaned back in her chair with an expression of professional satisfaction. "This is developing into one of the most advantageous divorce scenarios I've ever handled," she said. "Nathan's bargaining position is deteriorating by the hour." "What should I expect from him in terms of response?" I asked. "Desperation," she replied immediately. "Men like Nathan are accustomed to controlling narratives and managing outcomes. When they lose that control, they often make increasingly poor decisions." As if summoned by her words, my phone rang again. This time, Nathan's name appeared on the screen. "Answer it," Janet advised. "Let's see how he's handling the pressure." Nathan's voice was hoarse when I accepted the call. "Diana, please, you have to help me fix this." "Fix what?" "Exactly?" I asked, maintaining the neutral tone I'd perfected during business negotiations. "The video is destroying everything I've worked for. Clients are leaving. The partners are talking about suspension. The regulatory agencies are investigating me. Those sound like natural consequences of your choices, Nathan. You can't seriously want to destroy my entire career over a relationship that didn't even last 2 months." The admission hung in the air between us. Nathan had just confirmed that his affair with Amber had been ongoing for at least 2 months, longer than I'd originally suspected. "So it was a relationship," I said calmly. "Not just a professional consultation that got complicated." Silence stretched across the connection as Nathan realized what he'd just revealed. "Diana," he said finally, his voice breaking slightly, "I know I made mistakes, but this public humiliation is beyond anything I deserved." "Is it?" I asked genuinely. "You humiliated me publicly at our anniversary party. I simply responded in kind." "But you knew this would go viral. You knew it would destroy my reputation." "I knew it would have consequences," I admitted, "but I didn't orchestrate the social media response. People chose to share and discuss what they witnessed because they found it compelling." Janet gestured. For me to continue the conversation, clearly interested in Nathan's evolving strategy. "What do you want from me?" I asked him directly. "I want you to make a statement. Tell people that you were emotional and exaggerated the situation. Say that we're working through our problems privately." The audacity of his request was breathtaking. He wanted me to sacrifice my credibility to salvage his reputation. "Nathan, I'm not going to lie to protect you from the consequences of your own actions." "Then what will it take?" His voice carried a desperation I'd never heard before. "What do you want? Money? The house? Full custody? Name your price." Janet's eyebrows shot up with interest. Nathan was essentially offering to negotiate surrender terms. "I want a divorce," I said simply. "A fair divorce based on the prenuptial agreement we signed 12 years ago." "Fine, but you have to stop the public campaign against me." "There is no public campaign, Nathan. There's just the truth about what happened, documented by multiple witnesses and preserved on social media." "Diana, please, I'm begging you. Amber left me this morning. She said she couldn't handle the pressure and attention. I've lost everything." For a moment, I felt a flicker of the old sympathy that had once made me prioritize his needs over my own. But then I remembered standing on the country club terrace, watching him dance with another woman while our guests pretended not to notice. "You chose to risk everything for a 2-month relationship with your client," I replied. "The fact that she wasn't willing to weather the consequences with you suggests you didn't know her as well as you thought." "I made a mistake," he said, his voice now openly pleading. People make mistakes. It doesn't mean I deserve to lose my entire life. Nathan, you didn't make a mistake. You made a series of calculated decisions over the course of 2 months. You chose to pursue a romantic relationship with a client. You chose to use company resources to facilitate that relationship. You chose to bring her to our anniversary party and humiliate me in front of everyone we know. Janet nodded approvingly at my systematic breakdown of his choices. Each of those decisions had predictable consequences, I continued. The fact that you didn't consider those consequences doesn't make them unfair. What if I agree to everything in the divorce? The house, custody, alimony, everything. Will you help me salvage what's left of my career? The divorce terms will be determined by our prenuptial agreement and Arizona law, I said. Your career consequences are between you and your professional regulatory agencies. Diana, his voice cracked completely. I'm going to lose everything. My job, my reputation, my family, everything I've worked for my entire adult life. You're not losing your family, I corrected him. Tyler and Grace will always be your children. Your relationship with them doesn't have to change. But I'm losing you. The simple statement carried more genuine emotion than I'd heard from him in years. You lost me when you decided I was boring and disposable, I replied gently. Last night just made it official. After ending the call, Janet and I spent another hour reviewing the legal implications of Nathan's deteriorating situation. His willingness to negotiate surrender terms meant the divorce could proceed quickly and favorably. I've never seen a spouse's bargaining position collapse this rapidly, Janet admitted. Usually, these cases involve months of back-and-forth positioning. Nathan's public humiliation has eliminated his ability to negotiate from strength. What should I expect next? I asked. Paperwork, mostly. Nathan's attorney will want to settle quickly to minimize further damage to his reputation. We should have a preliminary agreement within the week. I left Janet's office with a strange sense of anticlimax. The marriage that had defined my adult life was ending not with prolonged legal battles, but with Nathan's desperate capitulation to avoid further professional destruction. The afternoon brought a steady stream of phone calls from potential clients interested in my reputation management services. Word had spread through Phoenix's business community that Diana Castellano was not only available for marketing consultation, but had demonstrated remarkable strategic thinking under pressure. Margaret Chen called first, wanting to discuss a crisis, communications plan for her husband's medical practice. 2 other wives of Nathan's former clients reached out about protecting their own families from association with the scandal. By evening, I'd scheduled 6 consultation meetings for the following week. Rita called as I was preparing dinner for Tyler and Grace. Nathan's sister had been fielding calls from extended family members who'd seen the viral video and wanted to understand what had happened. Half the family thinks you're a hero, she reported. The other half thinks you went too far. Personally, I think Nathan got exactly what he deserved. How is he handling the family reactions? I asked. He's not talking to anyone. David said, he holed up in some downtown hotel after Amber kicked him out of her apartment this morning. The information surprised me. I'd assumed Nathan would stay with Amber, given that their relationship had cost him everything else. Apparently, she decided that being associated with a professional scandal wasn't worth continuing the relationship, Rita continued. She's already posting on social media about moving forward with her life and learning from her mistakes. Amber's quick retreat from the situation confirmed what I'd suspected about her motivations. She'd been attracted to Nathan's success and stability, not necessarily to Nathan himself. When those advantages disappeared, so did her interest in weathering the consequences with him. Mom, Grace said, interrupting my conversation with Rita, there's a news van outside. I looked out the front window to see a local television crew setting up equipment on our quiet residential street. Apparently, the viral video had attracted traditional media attention. I'll call you back, Rita, I said, ending the conversation to deal with this new development. Tyler joined us at the window, his expression mixing excitement with concern. Are you going to talk to them? I don't think so, I replied. This story doesn't need any additional fuel. But as I watched the news crew prepare for what was obviously going to be a report about our situation, I realized that my control over the narrative was more limited than I'd believed. The viral video had created its own momentum, and other people were now shaping the story according to their own interests and perspectives. My phone rang again, this time showing a number I didn't recognize. Mrs. Castellano, this is Jennifer Martinez from Channel 7 News. We're preparing a story about your anniversary party speech and its impact on conversations about infidelity and public accountability. Would you be willing to provide a statement? I appreciate your interest, I replied diplomatically, but I prefer to keep my family's private matters private. The video has been viewed over 5 million times since last night, she continued. People are calling it a watershed moment for how women respond to public humiliation. Don't you think your voice should be part of that conversation? The question was more thoughtful than I'd expected. Jennifer was positioning the story not just as gossip about a local divorce, but as part of a larger cultural discussion about gender, power, and public accountability. I understand the broader implications people are drawing from what happened, I said carefully, but my focus right now is on protecting my children and moving forward with our lives. What would you want people to understand about your decision to respond so publicly? I considered the question seriously. The viral video had sparked conversations I hadn't anticipated, and maybe there was value in providing context for my choices. I would want people to understand that everyone deserves to be treated with respect and dignity, especially in their most important relationships, I said finally. When someone violates that basic principle, there should be consequences. Do you have any regrets about how you handled the situation? I regret that it was necessary, I replied honestly. I regret that my children have to navigate the public aspects of their parents' divorce. But I don't regret standing up for myself when I was being publicly humiliated. After ending the call, I realized that I'd inadvertently provided the news station with exactly the kind of thoughtful response they were hoping for. The story would now include my perspective alongside the viral video, creating a more complete narrative about the events. That evening, as Tyler, Grace, and I watched the news report together, I saw our family's crisis transformed into a broader story about modern relationships, social media accountability, and the changing dynamics of how women respond to betrayal. The reporter presented multiple perspectives, including quotes from relationship experts, social media analysts, and legal professionals. My brief statement was included alongside observations about the video's cultural impact and speculation about its long-term implications for similar situations. You sounded really smart, Mom, Grace said as the segment concluded. You sounded like someone who knew exactly what she was doing, Tyler added with obvious pride. As I tucked my children into bed that night, I reflected on how completely our lives had changed in less than 24 hours. The woman who'd woken up yesterday morning expecting to celebrate her anniversary was gone, replaced by someone who understood her own power in ways she'd never imagined possible. The viral video had created opportunities I couldn't have anticipated, conversations I'd never expected to influence, and a platform I'd never sought. Nathan's betrayal had inadvertently launched me into a public role I was only beginning to understand. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more media attention, and the continued process of rebuilding our family's life. But tonight, for the first time in months, I felt genuinely excited about the future, rather than resigned to maintaining someone else's version of happiness. The gift Nathan had promised to blow my mind had indeed transformed everything, just not in any way he could have imagined. The corporate conference room at Southwest Financial Advisory Group felt sterile and hostile as I sat across from Nathan and his attorney, Marcus Webb, 3 weeks after the anniversary party. The emergency partners meeting had concluded with Nathan's indefinite suspension pending regulatory review, and now his professional life hung in the balance of decisions being made by people who'd once considered him indispensable. Janet had prepared me for this moment, explaining that Nathan's deteriorating position would likely result in increasingly desperate negotiation tactics. What she hadn't prepared me for was seeing my husband of 12 years looking genuinely broken. The confident financial advisor who'd charmed clients and commanded respect had been replaced by someone who seemed to shrink into his expensive suit. "Diana," Nathan began, his voice hoarse from what David had told me were sleepless nights and constant phone calls to attorneys. "I need you to understand what this suspension means. I can't meet with clients, can't manage accounts, can't even access my office computer. My income has stopped completely." Marcus placed a restraining hand on Nathan's arm, clearly trying to prevent him from appearing too desperate during negotiations. But the damage was already visible in Nathan's drawn features and the tremor in his hands as he reached for his water glass. "My client is prepared to offer extremely favorable terms for an expedited divorce," Marcus said, sliding a document across the polished conference table. "In exchange, we'd like Mrs. Castellano to consider making a public statement clarifying that certain aspects of her anniversary speech were influenced by emotional distress." Janet picked up the document without breaking eye contact with Marcus. "Mr. Webb, are you seriously asking my client to lie about documented facts in order to rehabilitate your client's reputation?" "We're asking for nuance," Marcus replied carefully. "Public statements made during emotional trauma don't always reflect the complete complexity of a situation." I studied the settlement offer with growing amazement. Nathan was proposing to give me everything: the house, primary custody of Tyler and Grace, his retirement accounts, even his collection of vintage wines. The only thing he wanted in return was a public statement that might restore some credibility to his professional standing. "This is quite generous," I admitted, continuing to read through the terms. "But there's nothing I said at the anniversary party that wasn't factually accurate." "Diana, please," Nathan interrupted, his composure finally cracking completely. "The regulatory investigation is going to destroy any chance I have of working in finance again. 3 state agencies are reviewing my conduct. 2 clients have filed formal complaints. The Arizona Corporation Commission is talking about permanent license revocation." His desperation was palpable, and for a moment I felt the familiar urge to prioritize his needs over my own principles. 12 years of marriage had conditioned me to view his problems as our problems, his failures as our shared responsibility to manage. "If I lose my license," he continued, his voice breaking, "I can't support Tyler and Grace. I can't contribute to their college funds or help with their expenses. Everything I've built for our family's future will be gone." "Nathan," I said, gently, "you're the one who jeopardized the family's financial security when you violated professional ethics for a 2-month relationship." "It wasn't supposed to affect anything else," he said, running his hands through his hair with agitated movements. "Amber and I were discreet. We met outside of business hours. I never used client funds inappropriately." Janet looked up from the settlement documents with sharp interest. "Actually, Mr. Castellano, the expense reports your wife provided show multiple instances of personal expenses charged to business accounts. Hotel rooms, restaurant bills, even jewelry purchases were categorized as client entertainment." Marcus shifted uncomfortably, clearly unhappy with the direction of the conversation. "Those were administrative errors, not intentional misuse of funds." "Administrative errors that happened to coincide perfectly with your client's romantic relationship?" Janet's tone was skeptical. "Mr. Webb, your client's financial records tell a very clear story about intentional deception." Nathan leaned forward across the table, addressing me directly rather than speaking through our attorneys. "Diana, I know what I did was wrong. I know I hurt you and damaged our family. but destroying my entire career won't undo any of that. Damage. I'm not destroying your career, Nathan. The regulatory agencies are reviewing your conduct based on documented evidence. That's how professional oversight is supposed to work. But you could help, he pressed. A statement from you, saying that our marriage had problems before Amber, that the affair was a symptom rather than the cause of our issues. Something that shows the regulatory agencies that this was personal misconduct, not professional incompetence. The request revealed Nathan's fundamental misunderstanding of what had made his behavior professionally problematic. He still didn't grasp that sleeping with a vulnerable client violated ethical boundaries regardless of the state of his marriage. Nathan, your relationship with Amber violated professional conduct standards because she was your client, not because it threatened our marriage, I explained patiently. Those are separate ethical considerations. Diana's right, Janet added. The regulatory agencies aren't investigating Mr. Castellano for adultery. They're investigating him for potential exploitation of a client relationship and misuse of company resources. Marcus attempted to redirect the conversation toward practical considerations. Mrs. Castellano, regardless of the regulatory outcomes, my client's ability to provide financial support for your children depends on some form of professional rehabilitation. Surely that's worth considering. Tyler and Grace's financial security was protected the moment I decided to resume my career, I replied. My marketing consultancy has already generated more income in 3 weeks than I expected for the entire first quarter. This was true in ways I hadn't anticipated. The viral video had created demand for my services that extended far beyond Phoenix's business community. Companies dealing with reputation crises were reaching out from across Arizona and neighboring states, wanting to hire the woman who demonstrated such strategic thinking under pressure. Nathan's face went pale as he processed the implications of my statement. You're really doing this. You're really rebuilding your career. I'm moving forward with my life, I corrected. Just like you moved forward with yours when you decided our marriage was no longer interesting enough for you. I never said our marriage wasn't interesting, he protested. You said I wasn't interesting, Nathan. Multiple times according to the text messages on your burner phone. You told Amber that I'd become boring and predictable, that I was too focused on domestic responsibilities to notice what was happening around me. The direct quotes from his private communications hit Nathan like physical blows. He'd apparently forgotten that I'd documented everything before confronting him publicly. Those were just things I said when I was frustrated, he said weakly. I didn't mean them. But you did mean them enough to use them as justification for pursuing another woman, I replied. And now you're discovering that the boring, predictable wife you took for granted was actually the foundation that made your success possible. Janet gestured toward the settlement offer. Mrs. Castellano, despite my client's generous terms, I'd recommend accepting this proposal. Mr. Castellano's financial situation is only going to deteriorate further as the regulatory investigations proceed. Marcus nodded eagerly. We're hoping to finalize everything within the week, before any formal sanctions are announced. I considered the timeline they were proposing. Nathan wanted the divorce completed quickly, before his professional sanctions became public knowledge. He was trying to limit the potential damage to whatever remained of his reputation. What happens to Southwest Financial if Nathan's license is revoked? I asked, directing the question to no one in particular. The firm can continue operating. Without him, Janet replied, having clearly researched this possibility. But they'll lose his client relationships and his partnership investment. It would be a significant financial blow. Nathan flinched at this assessment. His partnership in Southwest Financial represented the largest portion of his personal wealth, built over 12 years of client cultivation and business development. David thinks they might have to buy out my partnership at a reduced rate, he admitted. The scandal has affected the firm's reputation with several major clients. How reduced are we talking about? I asked. Marcus consulted his notes reluctantly. potentially 60 to 70% below the partnership's assessed value 6 months ago. The financial implications were staggering. Nathan's professional misconduct hadn't just cost him his income, it had destroyed the equity he'd built in his business partnership. Of course, if Mr. Castellano could demonstrate that his personal conduct issues are being resolved through counseling and family reconciliation, the partnership buyout terms might be more favorable, Marcus suggested carefully. I stared at him with growing understanding. Are you asking me to pretend we're reconciling to help Nathan's business negotiations? We're suggesting that a public demonstration of family stability might help minimize the professional consequences of what everyone agrees was a personal mistake, Marcus replied diplomatically. The audacity of the request was breathtaking. Nathan wanted me to perform the role of the forgiving wife to salvage his business relationships, even as we proceeded with divorce paperwork. Absolutely not, I said firmly. I won't participate in any kind of reconciliation theater. Nathan leaned back in his chair, his last hope for damage control visibly crumbling. Then I'm going to lose everything. My career, my business equity, my ability to support our children. You lost those things when you chose to prioritize a 2-month affair over professional ethics, I replied. The consequences you're facing now are the natural result of your decisions. Diana, his voice took on a pleading quality that made me deeply uncomfortable. I'm begging you. Help me find a way through this. We were partners for 12 years. That has to count for something. For a moment, I felt the familiar pull of his distress, the conditioned response to prioritize his emotional needs over my own judgment. But then I remembered standing on the country club terrace, watching him dance with another woman while our guests pretended not to notice. We were partners, I agreed, right up until you decided to pursue a secret relationship with your client, while using our anniversary party to publicly humiliate me. I never meant for it to become public, he said desperately. I thought I could manage both relationships without anyone getting hurt. The statement revealed everything I needed to know about Nathan's character and judgment. He'd believed he could maintain parallel relationships indefinitely, managing both his wife and his mistress without consequences for anyone involved. Nathan, you brought your client girlfriend to our anniversary party and slow danced with her in front of everyone we know, I said patiently. How did you imagine that would remain private? He didn't have an answer, because there was no rational explanation for such spectacularly poor judgment. Janet gathered the settlement documents and began packing her briefcase. I think we've covered everything we can accomplish today. Mrs. Castellano will review the terms and provide a response by Friday. Wait, Nathan said quickly. There's something else I need to discuss. He pulled out his phone and showed me a series of social media screenshots. People are using our situation to attack other couples going through relationship problems. Some woman in Denver recreated your anniversary speech at her own party last week. 3 different wives have contacted me asking for advice about how to research their husband's professional conduct. I scrolled through the screenshots with fascination. The viral video had indeed inspired other women to take more aggressive approaches to marital betrayal, treating my anniversary speech as a template for public accountability. There's a whole online community forming around what they're calling the Castellano method, Nathan continued. Women are sharing strategies for investigating their husband's finances, documenting evidence of affairs, and using public humiliation as a divorce tactic. The implications were both fascinating and concerning. My response to Nathan's betrayal had apparently resonated with women who felt trapped in similar situations, inspiring them to take more decisive action. Diana, you've started something bigger than our divorce, Nathan said, his tone shifting to something approaching admiration mixed with fear. These women are treating you like some kind of guru for revenge against cheating spouses. I looked at Janet, who was clearly as surprised by this development as I was. Are you concerned about potential legal implications? I asked her. Not directly, she replied thoughtfully. You're not actively encouraging anyone to follow your example. But the viral nature of your video has certainly created unexpected influence. Nathan leaned forward again, his desperation now mixed with something that looked like respect. Diana, you could monetize this. Write a book, do speaking engagements, create online courses about strategic divorce planning. Turn what happened to us into a business opportunity. The suggestion was surprisingly astute. Nathan had always understood market opportunities, and he was recognizing that my viral response to his betrayal had created genuine demand for expertise I didn't know I possessed. Are you seriously suggesting I build a career around helping women divorce their cheating husbands? I asked. I'm suggesting you build a career around helping women protect themselves when relationships fail, he replied. You've demonstrated skills that people want to learn. Marcus looked uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. His client was essentially encouraging his estranged wife to profit from their marital disaster. Mr. Castellano, perhaps, we should focus on resolving your immediate legal situation before exploring Mrs. Castellano's business opportunities, Marcus suggested. But Nathan ignored his attorney, continuing to address me directly. Diana, you were always brilliant at marketing strategy. You understood how to identify target audiences, craft compelling messages, and execute campaigns that generated results. You just applied those skills to personal crisis instead of corporate clients. His analysis was accurate, though I hadn't consciously planned my anniversary speech as a marketing campaign. I'd simply responded to public humiliation with strategic thinking rather than emotional reaction. The women following your example aren't just angry wives seeking revenge, Nathan continued. They're intelligent women who feel trapped by traditional approaches to marital problems. You've shown them that there are other options, more aggressive strategies for protecting their interests. I considered his words carefully. The viral video had indeed connected with women who felt powerless in their relationships, who'd been conditioned to prioritize their partner's needs over their own protection. What exactly are you proposing? I asked. Accept the divorce settlement as offered, but capitalize on the platform you've created, Nathan said. Help other women navigate similar situations while building the kind of career you deserved to have 12 years ago. The irony of receiving career advice from the man whose betrayal had launched my public profile wasn't lost on me. And what do you get out of this arrangement? I asked suspiciously. Maybe some small chance that my professional destruction serves a larger purpose, he replied honestly. If my mistakes help other women protect themselves from similar situations, then at least something positive comes from the damage I've caused. Janet looked between us with obvious confusion. Mr. Castellano, are you seriously encouraging your wife to build a business around divorce strategy? I'm encouraging Diana to recognize the opportunity she's created, he replied. She's already generating significant income from reputation management consulting. This would be a natural extension of those services. As we left the conference room, I found myself considering Nathan's unexpected business advice alongside the generous settlement terms he'd offered. His professional destruction was complete, but his assessment of my market opportunity was characteristically shrewd. The man who'd once dismissed me as boring and predictable was now recognizing strategic abilities he'd apparently never noticed during our marriage. His betrayal had forced me to rediscover skills I'd forgotten I possessed, and now he was suggesting I leverage those skills into the kind of career I'd abandoned when we'd started our family. Walking through Southwest Financial's lobby for what would probably be the last time, I realized that Nathan's final gift to our relationship might be the clearest assessment he'd ever provided of my professional potential. The woman he'd taken for granted was indeed building something significant from the ruins of their marriage. She just hadn't needed his permission or partnership to make it happen. That evening, I sat in my home office researching the legal and business implications of the career path Nathan had suggested. The demand for strategic divorce consulting was apparently real and growing, driven by women who wanted more aggressive approaches to protecting their interests during relationship failures. My phone rang, interrupting my research. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but I answered anyway. Mrs. Castellano, this is Sarah Chen from Women's Wealth magazine. We'd like to interview you for our next cover story about women who've successfully navigated high-stakes divorces. Would you be interested in discussing your experience? I stared at my computer screen, where I'd been reading about professional opportunities I'd never imagined pursuing. I might be, I replied carefully. What kind of story are you planning? We want to explore how intelligent women can protect themselves when marriages fail, using your situation as a case study in strategic thinking during personal crisis. The interview request confirmed what Nathan had recognized during our settlement meeting. My response to his betrayal had created opportunities that extended far beyond Phoenix's business community. As I scheduled the magazine interview, I realized that the gift Nathan had promised to blow my mind was still revealing itself in ways none of us had anticipated. The boring wife he'd discarded was becoming someone entirely new, built from strategic thinking, hard-earned wisdom, and the kind of professional confidence that only comes from surviving the worst someone can do to you. And she was just getting started. 6 months after the anniversary party that changed everything, I stood in the conference room of my new office space in downtown Phoenix, addressing a group of 23 women who'd traveled from across the Southwest to attend my strategic divorce planning workshop. The morning sun streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating faces that reflected the same mixture of determination and vulnerability I remembered feeling during those first days after Nathan's betrayal. The transformation from abandoned wife to sought-after consultant had exceeded every expectation I'd harbored during those dark hours when I'd first discovered Nathan's affair. What began as a desperate response to public humiliation had evolved into a thriving business that helped women navigate complex divorces with strategic precision rather than emotional chaos. The key to protecting yourself during marital crisis isn't revenge, I explained to the workshop participants, clicking to the next slide in my presentation. It's information, knowledge about your legal rights, your financial position, and your spouse's vulnerabilities gives you power to control outcomes rather than simply react to circumstances. Margaret Chen, who'd attended the anniversary party and become one of my first clients, raised her hand from the front row. Diana, how do you balance strategic thinking with the emotional trauma of betrayal? It's hard to think clearly when your world is falling apart. The question reflected the struggle every woman in the room was facing. They'd all experienced some form of marital betrayal, and they were seeking practical guidance for protecting their interests while processing profound emotional wounds. Strategic thinking isn't about suppressing emotions, I replied. It's about channeling those emotions into productive action. When I discovered Nathan's affair, I felt devastated, humiliated, and furious. But instead of letting those feelings drive impulsive decisions, I used them as motivation to gather information and plan my response. I clicked to a slide showing the timeline I'd developed for documenting Nathan's misconduct. Anger can be incredibly clarifying if you direct it toward uncovering truth rather than seeking immediate satisfaction. A woman in the back row, Jennifer Walsh from Tucson, spoke without raising her hand. My husband thinks I'm too emotional to handle our divorce negotiations effectively. He keeps telling his attorney that I'm not thinking rationally. That's a common tactic, I acknowledged. Men often dismiss their wives' strategic responses as emotional overreaction because they're accustomed to being the only ones making calculated decisions in the relationship. I moved to the whiteboard and began sketching a diagram. When your spouse underestimates your intelligence or capabilities, that becomes a strategic advantage. They won't anticipate sophisticated planning because they don't believe you're capable of it. The room buzzed with recognition. These women had all experienced some version of being dismissed or underestimated by partners who'd grown comfortable with their accommodating nature. Nathan spent 12 years believing I was too focused on domestic responsibilities to understand his business operations. I continued. That assumption made him careless about hiding evidence because he never imagined I would look for it, much less know how to interpret what I found. Lisa Park, a physician from Flagstaff whose surgeon husband had been embezzling from their joint practice, leaned forward with interest. How do you document professional misconduct without alerting your spouse that you're investigating? Carefully and systematically, I replied, moving to flip chart paper where I began outlining investigation strategies. You use access you already have to gather information that supports patterns of behavior. Financial records, communication devices, professional contacts, schedule anomalies. Everything that seems normal in the context of your daily life, but reveals problematic conduct when analyzed collectively. I spent the next hour walking through specific techniques for documenting evidence, protecting assets, and building legal cases that would withstand scrutiny. The women took detailed notes, asked pointed questions, and shared their own discoveries about their husbands' hidden activities. During the lunch break, several participants approached me individually with situations that required personalized guidance. These consultations represented the core of my new business model. Intensive strategic planning sessions that combined legal preparation, financial analysis, and reputation management. Diana, said Rebecca Martinez, a teacher from Sedona whose husband had been conducting affairs with multiple colleagues. I'm worried about going public with what I've discovered. My husband is well connected in our community, and I'm afraid the exposure will backfire on me. This concern reflected the primary challenge many women faced when considering aggressive responses to marital betrayal. They feared that fighting back would make their situations worse rather than better. Rebecca, the question isn't whether exposure will create consequences, I replied. The question is whether those consequences serve your long-term interests better than maintaining silence. I pulled up a case study on my laptop, showing Rebecca how another client had successfully navigated a similar situation. When you control the narrative about misconduct, you position yourself as the responsible party seeking accountability rather than the vindictive spouse creating drama. But what if he retaliates? She asked. That's why documentation is so important, I explained. When you have comprehensive evidence of wrongdoing, retaliation efforts usually backfire because they draw more attention to the original misconduct. As the afternoon session began, I addressed the group's questions about long-term outcomes and personal recovery. Many of the women were struggling with identity issues that extended beyond their immediate legal and financial concerns. Rebuilding your life after strategic divorce isn't just about winning the settlement, I explained. It's about rediscovering who you are when you're not defined by someone else's needs and expectations. I clicked to a slide showing statistics about women's post-divorce career success, financial independence, and personal satisfaction. Research consistently shows that women who take aggressive approaches to protecting their interests during divorce achieve better long-term outcomes than those who prioritize maintaining relationships over securing fair treatment. Sandra Kim, from Scottsdale, whose tech executive husband had been stealing intellectual property from their joint startup, raised her hand. How do you handle the social consequences? Some people think I was too harsh with my public response to his misconduct. The question touched on something I'd grappled with extensively since the anniversary party video went viral. Public opinion about aggressive divorce tactics was sharply divided, with some people applauding strategic responses while others criticized them as excessive or vindictive. Sandra, you can't control other people's opinions about your choices, I replied. What you can control is whether those choices effectively protect your interests and those of your children. I moved to the whiteboard again, creating 2 columns labeled short-term social comfort and long-term personal security. Every woman in this room has to decide whether she values temporary social approval more than permanent financial and emotional protection, I continued. The people who criticize your strategic responses are usually the same ones who would have criticized you for being a victim if you'd remained silent. The discussion that followed revealed the extent to which social conditioning had taught these women to prioritize other people's comfort over their own protection. They'd been raised to view aggressive self-advocacy as unseemly or inappropriate, even when they were responding to serious betrayals. I used to worry constantly about what people thought of my response to Nathan's affair, I admitted. But then I realized that the people whose opinions mattered were actually impressed by my strategic thinking, rather than scandalized by my aggressiveness. A woman in the middle row, Patricia Davis from Albuquerque, spoke up. How do you handle the guilt? I keep feeling like I should have tried harder to save my marriage. The question prompted nods of recognition throughout the room. Guilt about the end of long-term relationships was nearly universal among my clients, regardless of how badly their spouses had behaved. Patricia, guilt is often a sign that you've been conditioned to accept responsibility for other people's choices, I replied. When someone violates the fundamental terms of your relationship, protecting yourself from further harm isn't something to feel guilty about. I clicked to a slide showing research about the psychological impact of infidelity and betrayal on the faithful spouse. The guilt you're experiencing is actually a trauma response that makes you focus on what you could have done differently, rather than holding the person who betrayed you accountable for their choices. The afternoon concluded with individual action planning sessions where each participant developed specific strategies for their unique situations. These personalized consultations represented the most valuable aspect of my workshops, allowing women to apply strategic principles to their particular circumstances. As the last participant left my office, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed since that devastating morning when I'd woken up to an empty house on my anniversary. The pain of Nathan's betrayal had been transformed into expertise that helped other women avoid similar devastation. My phone buzzed with a text message from Tyler, now 17 and more mature than his years suggested. Mom, saw the article about your workshop in the Phoenix Business Journal. Dad called and wanted to know if I'd read it. He sounded proud of you. The message surprised me. Nathan and I had maintained minimal contact since the divorce was finalized, communicating only about the children's schedules and needs. His regulatory sanctions had been severe: 2 years of license suspension, substantial fines, and mandatory ethics training. But he'd eventually found work as a financial consultant for a small firm that specialized in rehabilitation cases. Grace, now 14 and fiercely protective of our new family dynamic, had been less forgiving of Nathan's past behavior, but was gradually rebuilding a relationship with her father. Both children had benefited from family counseling that helped them process their feelings about the divorce without being forced to choose sides. That evening, as I reviewed client files in my home office, the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw Nathan standing on my front porch, holding what appeared to be a bottle of wine, and looking more nervous than I'd seen him since our settlement negotiations. I know I should have called first, he said when I opened the door, but I wanted to congratulate you on the Business Journal article. It sounds like your workshop was incredible. He looked different than he had 6 months ago. Thinner, less expensively dressed, but somehow more genuine than the polished financial advisor I'd married 12 years earlier. Thank you, I replied, stepping aside to let him enter. The response has been overwhelming. I'm booking workshops in 4 different states for the next quarter. Nathan set the wine bottle on the kitchen counter and turned to face me with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. Diana, I need to tell you something I should have said months ago. I waited, curious about what had motivated this unexpected visit. Watching you build this business, seeing how you've helped all these women, reading about your success in professional publications, it's made me realize how completely I failed to see who you really were during our marriage. He paused, running his hand through hair that had grown grayer in the months since our divorce. I spent 12 years thinking I was the strategic thinker in our relationship, the one with business expertise and professional insight. But you've accomplished more in 6 months of independence than I managed in years of what I thought was sophisticated planning. The admission was more honest than anything Nathan had said during our marriage or divorce proceedings. "Nathan, you don't need to—" "Yes, I do," he interrupted gently. "I need to acknowledge that my affair with Amber wasn't just about attraction or excitement. It was about my own insecurity and fear that I wasn't as impressive as I wanted to believe." He walked to the kitchen window that overlooked the backyard where Tyler and Grace had grown up, where we'd hosted countless family gatherings and planned what I'd thought would be our shared future. "Amber made me feel like the successful, dynamic man I wanted to be," he continued. "But you were the one who actually made me successful. Your strategic thinking, your social connections, your ability to manage complex situations, that was the foundation of everything I achieved professionally." I studied his profile as he gazed out at the desert landscape beyond our property. The man who'd once dismissed me as boring was finally recognizing contributions he'd been too self-absorbed to appreciate. "When I lost you, I didn't just lose my wife," Nathan said, turning back to face me. "I lost my business partner, my strategic advisor, and the person who understood how to navigate challenges I was too arrogant to even recognize." "Nathan," I said quietly, "where is this coming from?" "It's coming from watching you succeed in ways I never imagined possible," he replied. "You've built something remarkable from the worst moment of our relationship. You've turned betrayal into expertise, pain into purpose, and humiliation into power." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded newspaper clipping. "This article about your workshop mentions that you're writing a book about strategic divorce planning. 3 major publishers are bidding for the rights." I nodded, still surprised by the level of interest my story had generated in the publishing world. "Diana, you're going to help thousands of women protect themselves from men like me," Nathan continued. "You're going to teach them skills I never wanted you to have because I was threatened by your intelligence." The conversation was surreal, my ex-husband praising abilities he'd spent our entire marriage discouraging me from developing. "What do you want from me, Nathan?" I asked directly. "Nothing," he replied, his voice steady and clear. "I want to give you something." He pulled out another document, this one official-looking with legal formatting. "This is a waiver of any claim to intellectual property rights related to our marriage or divorce," he explained. "I'm formally releasing any potential legal interest in your book, workshops, or consulting business." I scanned the document with growing amazement. Nathan was voluntarily relinquishing rights he might have claimed to my new business, acknowledging that my success was entirely independent of our shared history. "Your story is your own," he said. "Your expertise comes from your intelligence and resilience, not from anything I contributed. I don't want there to be any question about your ownership of what you've built." The gesture was unexpected and genuinely generous, revealing growth I hadn't anticipated from the man who'd betrayed me so thoroughly. "There's something else," Nathan continued, his voice taking on a more vulnerable tone. "I've been attending therapy to understand why I made such destructive choices. Not just with Amber, but throughout our entire marriage." He sat down at the kitchen table where we'd shared thousands of meals and made countless family decisions. "Dr. Rodriguez helped me realize that I was so threatened by your capabilities that I systematically discouraged you from developing them," he admitted. "Every time you mentioned missing your marketing career, I found reasons why you were needed at home. Every time you showed strategic insight about my business, I dismissed it as meddling." The acknowledgement of patterns I'd recognized but never confronted directly was both validating and painful. I was afraid that if you developed your full potential, you'd realize you deserved better than what I was offering, Nathan continued. So I convinced myself that you were happier focusing on domestic responsibilities, that you'd chosen family over career because you preferred it that way. Maybe I did prefer it, I said honestly, at least initially. But you should have had the choice to change your mind, he replied. Instead, I made you feel guilty whenever you expressed interest in returning to professional life. We sat in silence for several minutes, processing the complexity of our shared history and its impact on both our current situations. Nathan, I said finally, I appreciate your honesty about what happened between us, but I need you to understand that forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. I know, he replied quickly. I'm not here to ask for another chance. I'm here to acknowledge that you deserved better treatment than I was capable of providing, and to make sure I don't interfere with the incredible future you're building. He stood up, preparing to leave, but paused at the kitchen doorway. Diana, the gift I promised to blow your mind at our anniversary party. It turns out I actually did give it to you, just not in the way either of us expected. I looked at him questioningly. I gave you the opportunity to discover who you really are when you're not trying to accommodate someone else's insecurities, he explained. You've become the woman you were always meant to be. After Nathan left, I poured myself a glass of the wine he'd brought and sat in my backyard as the Phoenix sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. The same desert light that had illuminated our anniversary party 6 months earlier now felt like a celebration of transformation rather than a backdrop for betrayal. My phone buzzed with emails from potential clients, interview requests from journalists, and scheduling confirmations for upcoming workshops. The business I'd built from the ashes of my marriage was thriving beyond my most optimistic projections. But more importantly, the woman I'd become through surviving Nathan's betrayal was someone I genuinely respected and admired. She was strategic, without being cruel, strong without being bitter, and successful without compromising her integrity. Tyler and Grace would grow up watching their mother build something meaningful from life's most difficult challenges. They would understand that betrayal doesn't have to be the end of someone's story. It can be the beginning of their most authentic chapter. As I reviewed my schedule for the following week, I realized that Nathan had been right about one thing. His promise to give me a gift that would blow my mind had indeed been fulfilled. The gift wasn't the anniversary party or the public humiliation or even the divorce that followed. The gift was the discovery that Diana Castellano was capable of, far more than anyone, including herself, had ever imagined. The boring wife who'd been discarded for a more exciting alternative had become a woman who helped other wives transform their own stories of betrayal into narratives of strategic triumph. And she was just getting started. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.